Welcome back to the Empire of Secrets. Today we voyage to the far southern reaches of the world, to a land of glaciers, windswept plains, and legends so persistent that even centuries later, they still capture our imagination. We're talking about the giants of Patagonia. Tales of enormous people inhabiting Patagonia stretch back hundreds of years, carried in the journals of explorers, the sketches of early cartographers, and the pages of sensationalized news. These are stories that straddle the line between folklore, historical misreporting, and genuine scientific inquiry. Some argue they were based on real encounters with unusually tall individuals. Others suggest fossil misidentifications, exaggerations, or colonial propaganda. Today, we'll trace the roots of these legends, weigh the evidence, and explore why humanity remains fascinated by giants. Let's begin with the earliest accounts. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan's expedition reached the southern tip of South America. The European chroniclers recorded seeing the native Tehuelche people, who were taller than the average Spaniard of the time, reportedly sometimes exceeding 6 feet. To 16th century eyes, this was astonishing. Some journals inflated these measurements dramatically, describing men who could easily stride over a horse or bend tree trunks. These accounts, while likely exaggerated, planted the seed of the Patagonian giant in the European imagination. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, explorers and naturalists visiting Patagonia contributed further reports. Captain Robert Fitzroy, later of HMS Beagle fame, noted locals of considerable stature, though always carefully measured. However, some published accounts drifted into sensationalism. Newspapers in London, Paris, and Boston ran stories of giants in Patagonia, often illustrated with engravings that bordered on fantasy. Artists depicted men taller than trees, wielding clubs, and living in primitive fortresses. While clearly imaginative, these images cemented the idea of giants as part of the world's mysterious geography. At the same time, archaeological misidentification fueled the myth. In the 19th century, European collectors brought back enormous bones and skulls from South America. Some were prehistoric megafauna, giant ground sloths, mammoths, or mastodons. Misinterpreted as human remains, they reinforced the legend of extraordinary humans. A skull fragment might be miscatalogued as evidence of a 7-foot man, while in reality, it belonged to a long-extinct animal. These errors were not necessarily deliberate. Early naturalists were operating with incomplete data, a rush to publish, and the allure of sensational discoveries. Then there is the colonial narrative itself. Stories of giants served ideological purposes. European colonizers often used tales of monstrous natives to justify conquest, portraying distant peoples as exotic, threatening, or otherworldly. Giants became a convenient shorthand for the dangers of the unknown southern lands. At the same time, accounts of colossal civilized Europeans encountering these giants allowed a dramatic tension. Civilization versus wilderness, reason versus chaos. But what about actual human biology? Today we know that the Tehuelche were indeed taller than many European contemporaries, averaging perhaps 6 feet in height. That's tall, especially when the average European male of the 16th century was closer to 5 feet, 5 inches, or 5 feet 6 inches. Combined with natural exaggeration and sensational retelling, it's easy to see how tales of giants could arise from real humans. Even isolated cases of exceptional height, individuals reaching 7 feet, would have been extraordinary, easily turned into legend. Modern scientific analysis also suggests that misinterpreted skeletal remains played a huge role. In several instances, Paleontologists discovered fossils of prehistoric mammals, sometimes very large, and initially assigned them to humans or humanoid creatures. Early museum exhibits occasionally displayed such bones with explanatory plaques suggesting gigantic prehistoric humans. These interpretations were later corrected, but the stories persisted in public consciousness. One fascinating angle is the intersection of legend and local folklore. Indigenous Patagonia narratives do include references to unusually large beings. Some myths describe enormous hunters or spirits, but these are rarely literal. Anthropologists point out that many such stories serve cultural functions, explaining natural hazards, encoding social norms, or entertaining through hyperbole. Europeans encountering these stories often misunderstood or mistranslated them, converting symbolic language into alleged eyewitness reports of literal giants. Now, let's consider the 19th century giant mania. Newspapers and periodicals of the time, particularly in Britain and the United States, loved sensational stories. Tales of Patagonian giants were printed alongside reports of the Loch Ness Monster, the Mokele Mbembe in Africa, and other exotic wonders. Illustrators took creative liberties, sometimes combining multiple sources or pure imagination to craft dramatic images. These accounts were marketed to a public hungry for adventure and the mysterious. In short, giants sold papers. There's also a scientific lens. Anthropologists in the 19th and 20th centuries sought to separate fact from fiction. Skeletal measurements, dental records, and careful analysis of indigenous populations revealed no evidence of actual superhuman size. Claims of skeletons measuring 10, 12, or even 15 feet were consistently debunked. Even so, some fringe researchers continue to cite alleged anomalies, usually misreported, misinterpreted, or outright hoaxes. Another layer is the cultural resonance of giants. From the biblical Goliath to Norse Jotnar, from Greek Titans to the Sasquatch in North America, humans have consistently imagined beings larger than ourselves. Giants symbolize strength, danger, and the boundary between human and divine. Patagonia's giant legends fit naturally into this global archetype. Whether real or imagined, the stories reflect universal themes: awe at nature, fear of the unknown, and fascination with human extremes. But there's more than folklore and biology. Let's explore colonial storytelling and geopolitical framing. In early European accounts, giants often appeared at moments of contact between explorers and indigenous peoples. Descriptions emphasized size, courage, or savagery, sometimes to legitimize conquest or trade advantages. Maps, journals, and engravings conveyed both wonder and fear, reinforcing a narrative that the South American Southlands were full of strange and formidable forces. These narratives endured for decades, occasionally resurfacing in adventure literature or travelogues. Some modern writers also speculate about an unknown prehistoric human race. While mainstream archaeology finds no evidence for humanoid giants in Patagonia, the persistence of the myth encourages alternative histories. These ideas often cite isolated finds of unusually large bones, mismatched skeletal fragments, or misclassified fossil records. While intriguing, none of these claims survive rigorous scrutiny. The takeaway is less about actual giants and more about the power of storytelling and the human imagination. So why do we still care about giants of Patagonia? Why are these tales retold, illustrated, and occasionally treated as more than myth? Part of the answer is narrative psychology. Humans are drawn to extremes, to beings that exceed normal limits. Giants evoke awe, fear, and wonder, emotions that create memorable stories. Part is cultural. These legends have been embedded in art, literature, and media for centuries. And part is methodological. Sensational claims, no matter how debunked, continue to circulate because they are easy to grasp and emotionally satisfying. Consider the modern lens. Conspiracy theorists and alternative history enthusiasts often frame Patagonia as a kind of lost world. Unusual artifacts, alleged skeletal anomalies, and early explorer accounts provide fertile ground for speculation. The narrative is compelling. Isolated humans, strange creatures, colonial encounters, and a mysterious southern landscape. Even without factual proof, the story resonates because it touches on archetypal themes: discovery, danger, and the unknown. Let's summarize the evidence. Eyewitness accounts. Real tall Tehuelche individuals exaggerated by European chroniclers. Misidentified bones. Prehistoric megafauna misinterpreted as human. Colonial storytelling. Exaggerated tales for ideological and entertainment purposes. Folklore and myth. Indigenous legends interpreted literally by outsiders. Cultural resonance. Giants as archetypes of strength, mystery, and fear. No single factor explains the legend entirely. The story of Patagonian giants emerges from a web of human perception, imagination, and the desire to mythologize the unfamiliar. And yet, the myth persists. Why? Perhaps because Patagonia itself is a place that feels almost mythic. Windswept plains, glaciers, and mountains that seem untouched. It is a landscape that encourages imagination to roam, a place where ordinary humans might seem small against the vastness of nature. Giants, in this sense, are a metaphor for the overwhelming, awe-inspiring scale of the world. Some final thoughts for storytellers and creators. When you recount the story of the Patagonian giants, remember that the truth and the myth are intertwined. There were indeed tall humans, misidentified bones, and vivid stories. But the legend survives because it touches something deeper, a universal fascination with size, power, and the unknown. If you enjoyed this journey into Patagonia's giant legends, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon for more deep dives into history, myth, and the mysterious corners of our world. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember, some giants may not exist in the bones, but they live in our imagination.